Welcome to the 80th episode of our Crossing Thin Ice podcast series, where twice a month we tackle risk management topics. I'm Max Rudolph, and today my partner Dave Ingram will tackle the Pragmatist Manifesto. In this, he'll add to our VUCA discussions to navigate a new regime that may stick around for a while, like the Great Moderation of the mid-1980s to 2007. He'll share how a pragmatist will use scenarios to maximize maneuverability to survive, rather than focusing on optimization strategies. Please share with anyone interested in lifelong learning about risk management. As a reminder, nothing in today's podcast is intended to be investment advice. We are here to provide educational material on risk topics without getting lost in the weeds. Let's get started.
So here we are. The world is in chaos. Volatility is shaking things up. Uncertainty is confounding us. Complexity is confusing us. And ambiguity has the fog machine running day and night. What can we do? The answer to that is, of course, it all depends on what you think is next. I can think of 3 rational beliefs about that future. First, you might believe that things will calm down and go back to normal very soon. You could also believe that things will stay this way for the foreseeable future, or that things will calm down but shift to a new normal. Unfortunately, you have to choose which of these 3 things that you want to believe and prepare for, because what you do is very different depending on what you see as the likely future. If you believe in the first choice, then all you have to do is wait. It's like preparing for a heavy seasonal storm. Maybe you need to bring in the lawn chairs, but no serious preparation is needed. If you believe in the third choice, then you have another decision. What new normal situation do you want to prepare for? Whatever it is, you'll be preparing to pivot. In a recent post, we shared 4 ideas from Max and I on several different directions for new normals. Doubtless, you can think of others yourself that are quite different. You cannot prepare for all of them, so you'll have to prepare to either guess exactly right or, much more realistically, prepared to be adaptable, to be ready to pivot when that new normal starts to coalesce. We're going to focus now on that second belief, the belief that VUCA will be with us for the foreseeable future. This belief and the strategy that flows from it is not generally covered in the literature. Standard economics, with its strong belief in the natural attractor of equilibrium, fits into the first idea above, that things will always go back to normal. But if you believe in persistent VUCA, there's actually a coherent strategy that you'd want to follow. It's very different from other strategies. We'll call the folks that follow this strategy the Pragmatists. If you believe that normal is a system like the Great Moderation, then you'll want to have complicated models to measure your risk and a full ERM program with limits and controls and risk appetite to protect your returns, and your strategy will likely to be to optimize your portfolio, taking advantage of stable, less than full correlations between different business choices to get some free returns without adding the full risk to your business. These folks we'll call the managers. Pragmatists don't expect the measurements to be reliable, and especially not the correlations. So they will want to keep their eyes and ears open all the time to sense when the risks are shifting rather than measuring them. And rather than optimizing, pragmatists will want to diversify their business as much as possible. Part of optimizing for the manager ERM program is setting a risk appetite, and the most efficient position is usually to have deployed as much of your capital as you can within that risk appetite, according to your internal capital model. Pragmatists are more likely to just use the regulatory or rating agency capital model and to hold a significant buffer above that against an adverse swing. The pragmatists will be looking to maximize maneuverability, seeing that as a survival key. Speed of decision making and speed to exit a risk position are vital for that maneuverability. They do not know what the future will bring. That is what uncertainty means. The pragmatists are fully adapted to the uncertain world. Diversification is a key concept in their strategy. Nothing they're doing is large enough to fatally harm the firm if things go wrong. Besides avoiding large commitments, the pragmatists will also shy away from long-term commitments. Risk managers can lead the company towards this pragmatist approach, or they can wait until management naturally starts drifting towards it. The environment will be giving all the feedback that the approach that has been reliable mainstay no longer can produce reliable returns. Moving towards pragmatist strategy means starting to tighten risk limits and maybe stop treating risk as totally fungible. The largest individual risk positions become a major concern. An old simple approach that doubled capital requirements on the largest positions might make eminent sense to the pragmatist. Here are a set of 6 action statements that a pragmatist might use to define their approach, and we'll call these 6 the Pragmatist Manifesto. Number 1, the world is fundamentally unpredictable and nonlinear. Uncertainty is the baseline condition, not an anomaly. Rare, high-impact events shape history more than predictable targets, and tomorrow rarely follows logically from today's data. Number 2, reality is a complex, interconnected web. Problems here are wicked, tangled in feedback loops where cause and effect are separated by time and space. There are no objective right answers, only perspectives that work better or worse for specific goals. Number 3, nothing is ever truly fixed. Reality is a continuous process, not a series of problems to be permanently solved. Every intervention also leaves a permanent trace. The system is forever changed, and there is no undo button. Number 4, stability is temporary. Today's certainties are temporary. A belief is only true insofar as it successfully guides us through experience. And as context shifts, yesterday's expertise becomes tomorrow's liability. Number 5, optimization eliminates the slack that systems need to absorb shocks. Suppressing small failures doesn't remove risk, it hides and accumulates until a catastrophic release becomes inevitable. Number 6, change is a permanent feature of reality. Change is not an enemy to be defeated. It must be accommodated and worked with, not suppressed or wished away. Scenarios are a key tool for the pragmatist. They would not necessarily want to abandon the internal risk model that was so painstakingly constructed by their manager predecessors, but they would want to augment that with a study of some scenarios that are perhaps very different. Here's a number of examples. The first scenario is a decision-making scenario. We find ourselves in a rapidly moving market where the board's weekly or monthly cadence is too slow to authorize a necessary exit, turning a good analysis into a bad outcome. The next scenario is the liquidity pipeline test, looking at the mechanical ability to exit a position during a regime shift rather than just calculating a theoretical loss. And the next scenario is a cascading network breakdown. We focus on the ripple effects and interconnectedness of modern financial systems, where one small failure can take down an entire company. And then the everything fails at once scenario, a test of how the system survives when diversification suddenly disappeared and every asset or hedge breaks simultaneously. Is the maximum limit scenario. The company has set limits to allow for flexibility in risk-taking. The separate limits for all of the risks add up to something significantly in excess of the total company tolerance. Here, in this scenario, everyone chooses to max out their limits all at once, and we see what the governance system will do about that. And now the last scenario, the one-way door. This scenario identifies strategic moves that are irreversible, and it simulates what happens if the environment shifts immediately after the door is locked. If the company is trapped in a growth path that has stripped away its maneuverability and optionality. So, none of the 3 choices we mentioned at the outset is inherently right or wrong. Each one is rational if the belief about the environment behind it proves to be correct. You can see from this discussion of the pragmatist strategy for the VUCA world that it is a very different strategy from what you might have been practicing. If your strategy assumes stability while the world has shifted to persistent turbulence, you could have serious problems. The manager's tools, the regular ERM program, work beautifully in a stable system. But in a prolonged VUCA environment, survival belongs to those who preserve maneuverability, diversify wisely, and stay alert to weak signals of change. The real decision, therefore, is not which techniques to use, it is deciding honestly which world you believe you're operating in, and making sure your risk management policies match the needs of success in that world.
Dave, in your view, what are the biggest barriers, cultural, organizational, or psychological, that prevent risk managers or executives from shifting toward the pragmatist approach, even when the environment clearly calls for it?
Well, Max, I think the pragmatist approach just goes against most business management literature. And I think that has skewed very strongly towards the approach that would fit with that great moderation period. For example, over the last 20 years or so, the CFO role has changed dramatically, where a CFO 20, 25 years ago was, in my mind, a relatively passive role. They were trying to focus on the budget and financial reporting, but the CFOs since then have seen themselves as a profit center, and they've become a profit center by continually working on improving the efficiency of the organization. And I think that what we've seen in the time since things have been so roiled in the last several years of VUCA is that optimization actually increases or decreases the resilience of the organization, increases the fragility of it, because often that optimization process it involves just continually cutting out any places where the company has excesses of expenses, excesses of capital, excesses of capacity, trying to use all of them up and to get to the most efficient, the most effective way of doing everything. The pragmatist idea is not that at all. It's to leave in some of those excesses in almost all places because we don't know what we're going to need going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I agree with you that the CFO's role for both operational and financial efficiency has really grown over the years. Have you seen any industries or types of organizations that seem naturally better suited to the pragmatist mindset? And conversely, which ones struggle with it the most and potentially why?
It's interesting. I first noticed it or was able to isolate the idea of a pragmatist style by recalling how a couple of different firms that I worked with, either when I was an analyst at S&P or when I was a consultant at Milliman, and those firms were all closely held firms. They were owned by an individual or a family or a private equity group. And all of those firms, or at least all the ones that I was able to observe look like this pragmatist approach, we're not trying to do that optimization. And in fact, what you saw going on there was what I would call a very high attention approach to risk management. In all of those cases, the owners through the board would have high involvement of people, one or more people on the board that was the owner's representative, in effect, who would actually be involved in the day-to-day operation of the business, but they weren't involved in all of it. They were only paying attention to one or two or three really big things, the biggest things that the company was doing. And that was very different from a company which was putting everything on a spreadsheet and managing it from the spreadsheet. The firms that had trouble with, that would have trouble with that, I think, are the firms that are highly organized in a bureaucratic fashion, that have very carefully delineated job roles and authority pyramids and things like that. People that are in the insurance business have invested quite a bit in developing a risk model, an enterprise risk model that they try and run the company off of. People that think that they can measure everything and run it off of a careful model would never want to do what the pragmatist is doing, devoting a lot of their energy to just trying to sort of read the tea leaves as to what's going on, as to what risks are getting much worse, much more dangerous.
Well, and when it's your own capital, I think that makes you a pragmatist as well.
Max, looking ahead, do you think the current level of VUCA is likely to persist for many years or even decades? Or do you think it will intensify further? What factors do you watch most closely to gauge this?
Well, there's certainly a lot of moving parts out there right now. Some can be modeled, but the stochastic on stochastic methods I don't think can be deployed successfully. The models just take too long to run that many variables for one. And then also, I would not feel comfortable with a statistical distribution that describes the current political or cultural environment, for example, and how we might move between those. I might look at qualitatively analyzing one variable at a time to get a feel for which ones might matter, but I might be wrong. So I need to quantitatively test these when I can. And some of those could be stochastic. Combining two or more variables into one deterministic scenario would be the next step, but you can't do all of them. There are just too many. In your article, Dave, you shared 6 different scenario types. I would try to do a postmortem on examples of each to try to learn from prior experiences. The first one was a decision-making scenario. I would look at the 1994 Orange County, where a portfolio manager did well in a falling interest rate scenario, but then blew up when a small temporary increase in rates occurred. Second one is a liquidity pipeline test. And the obvious example there is the 2008 Lehman Brothers failure. But today's private markets would be a good example to test as well. The third one is cascading network breakdown. This is a contagion test. I think I view this at the ecosystem level, while Dave, I think you've defined it for a company. For operational risks, I would do this qualitatively, say for a cyber breach event. And for financial risks, I would look for systemic risks that are not diversifiable. In 2008, I might have tracked the mortgages being sold and where the risk exposure ended up. Today, our high debt to GDP leaves us fragile to stagflation and a fall on both Wall Street and Main Street that would impact businesses, pensions, government safety nets, insurance, and a general breakdown of order. I worry about this one the most, but it's hard to anticipate and plan for. The fourth scenario is the everything fails at once scenario, where all correlations go to one. The classic example would be 1929. I've been seeking and finding quite a few leading indicators of the fragility that leads to this financial scenario. But about all you can do is to keep leverage low and be a lifetime learner so you can adapt. The fifth one is the max limit scenario. What if diversification doesn't work? The company version of everything fails at once. Insurers who go bankrupt have historically had concentrations in either a single asset class or a single region and risk on the liability side. Today, the regulators are very concerned with a focus on optimization rather than what a pragmatist would bring to the table. And the sixth one is the one-way door. This is where companies or countries have taken irreversible paths and are trapped without the ability to maneuver. Insurers can be backed into a corner if they source their assets to a single manager who focuses on a limited number of illiquid asset classes, with liabilities priced aggressively, with long durations, or a mismatch. For an economy, stability is necessary from oversight, systems, climate, safety nets, demographics, infrastructure, the rule of law. Losing any of these things means you have to choose between options. You can't do everything for everyone. I expect that I'll be expanding on this concept over the next few months, but Dave, the pragmatist is incredibly important in this scenario. Dave, the pragmatist approach emphasizes holding capital buffers and avoiding over-reliance on internal models. How aggressive or conservative do you believe these buffers should be in practice? And how should companies determine the right size?
The pragmatists, when they're looking to decide how much of a buffer to hold, they tend not to be highly analytical about it. If you're not going to rely on the model, I tend to think of it in terms of, well, first looking at how much does your modeled result depend on those correlations or lack of correlations that you're assuming in the model calculations. So a first approximation of a buffer I would think of to hold is some large fraction of that diversification reduction in capital. Uh, so that you'd at least be protected against the scenario of everything going bad at once. Other people I've heard have set their buffers according to a particular stress test. If you look at it in terms of ratings cap, a buffer could be set so that you imagine that some adverse event happens, and then what kind of rating do you want to be able to support after that event? So the total capital you might have is you look for a credit event like the credit event we had in 2001 and then assume that you had a loss of that magnitude and then look to have uh, the amount of capital to support your desired rating after that event as another way of determining that buffer.
So, Dave, if you were advising a risk manager who wants to start moving their organization toward pragmatist practices tomorrow, what would be the very first steps you would recommend they take?
I think I'd go with the thing that you were just talking about, Max, those scenarios or other scenarios, shifting emphasis away from the statistical calculations into those scenario situations is a great way of getting people thinking more like a pragmatist because those scenarios are exactly that. The pragmatist is hoping to be ready for lots of different possibilities. And that's exactly what you're doing with those scenarios. There's another couple concepts that pragmatists wind up paying attention to, such as the ability to stop doing things. What happens if you stop in an insurance company, particularly a life insurance company, it's usually very hard because yes, you can stop placing new business, but you are very much stuck with a lot of the old business for decades. The only solution to that is particular types of reinsurance contracts. So doing sort of fire drills, thinking about what kind of reinsurance you'd want to get out of different types of business that you've been in.
I have one last question for you, Dave. What do you see? You've spent a lot of time recently and have become one of the actuarial profession's leading artificial intelligence experts. So what do you see as the role of technology, whether it be AI, real-time data, or something else, in enabling or enhancing the pragmatist approach going forward?
Well, I think being realistic about the true capabilities of AI, one of the true capabilities of AI is speed. And so, as a pragmatist, you want to look in a lot of directions. You want to look at a lot of things, and you can use AI to help you with that. I wouldn't rely on AI as my only source, but you don't have time to look at all the things you want to look at as a pragmatist risk manager. So you can have your AI system helping you with that, doing internet searches for you and paying attention to things that you just don't have the time to do. The other thing that the large language models have a real interesting capability with is to be the devil's advocate. If your company hasn't cultivated a person that can do that, the AI can do a decent job of being the devil's advocate, of just putting forward the company's plans, putting those into AI and saying, what could go wrong? What are the ways in which this could fail? And it will come up with a possibly exhaustive list. It will come up with a list that includes a lot of unrealistic things, but it may show you something that you hadn't thought of that you do want to worry about. You do want to figure out how to pay attention to it. So those are two ways I'd use AI for that.
Yeah, I remember back when I was at a company where we were selling deferred annuities, and when the bigger models, we first were able to run longer models, we started doing some stochastic work. And I remember we put in different interest rate scenarios and then looked at the five worst results. And the worst result by far was one where interest rates, for deferred annuities stayed down for a long time. And so you were crediting the guarantee as opposed to what you're actually earning. And then all of a sudden they spiked. So it was exactly what happened just a couple of years ago. But we were, it was nowhere on my radar when that came out, but it's been on my radar ever since to watch for that scenario because when interest rates spike, people leave and you don't have a chance to make up that lost profit that you had when interest rates were low. So that was interesting though, Dave. Thanks for sharing. Enterprise risk management from the view of a pragmatist gives every risk manager the context for success in a volatile world and the means for that success. Redundancy ensures survival, while optimization may not. Diversification requires hard and fast rules limiting concentration, setting hard limits, and planning for worst case scenarios where all correlations go to one. Look at risk in new ways. Don't miss the forest for the trees. Focus on direction of change rather than providing false precision. Seek out fragility and contagion. Communicate your findings and shorten decision times. Stay flexible and rehearse possible scenarios with decision makers in advance. This is good advice no matter what scenario plays out. You're better off to anticipate reactions before a scenario shows itself to you. You won't get everything right, but your team will be used to working together to react with the firm's risk appetite. This is the outcome from looking at the pragmatist. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Crossing Thin Ice. If you found it valuable, please like, subscribe, and share with your colleagues.